Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, which was named by Poets and Writers a best book for writers. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, and I'm so delighted to have Deborah Sosin with us, the author of Escape Velocity, 70 micro memoirs, 70 words each, how one 70-year-old push-pulled her way out of her too much, not enough family. Deborah Sosin is a writer, editor, psychotherapist, and Grub Street instructor. Her essays have appeared in the New York Times, Boston Globe Magazine, Salon, Cognoscenti, Brevity Blog, Ulster Magazine, Short Reads, The Manifestation, 2 anthologies, and numerous other publications. She is a volunteer reader for In Short, a journal of flash nonfiction. Debbie also authored the award-winning picture book, Charlotte and the Quiet Place, and a clinical workbook, Sober Starting Today. Welcome to the program, Deborah.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
So let's talk about what made you decide to write this book and in this format.
So in the spring of 2024, a friend of mine who creates these little zines, these tiny little booklets of very short pieces, and she just asks her friends to submit something. And I take that as a challenge. And I think she said keep it under 50 words. So this one was called A Thing I No Longer Have. And I wrote about a onesie that I bought in the hopes of having a child when I was much younger. And that threads throughout the book, that theme of buying that onesie. So I condensed it into less than 50 words. I think maybe it was exactly 50 words. And I loved it as a literary exercise. What can I do with this big story to make it small and tight and powerful? And after that, it was right around my 70th birthday. And I had the thought, I just sat up one day and I thought, oh, that would be so fun to write a bunch of 50-word micro memoirs, just to do that. And then I thought, what if I wrote 70 micro memoirs? What if they were exactly 70 words each to kind of mark my 70th birthday? So that was that ended up being around April 2024. And I just got to work. I just thought, this is fun. Let me try.
That's so interesting. And so what did you think about setting up the structure? Like, I see that you start in childhood, you kind of do it in a chronological fashion, but you also have themes running through it. How did you decide how to set it up and what kind of themes to put in?
Well, that evolved over many months, as you can imagine. At first, I conceived the book as just a bunch of snippets, not necessarily related. I had just read Beth Ann Fennelly's Heating and Cooling. I was very familiar with Abby Thomas's work. And I just thought, oh, just snippets, just scenes from my life, scenes about my family, scenes about school, scenes about my jobs, about love, about loss, about music and travel. And I just made a list of all the kinds of scenes, I think, that might make a good, tight little story. And I probably had, I don't know, over 100 on a list at some point. And then I asked Michael Lowenthal, who's a developmental editor. Oh, he's a writer. He just published a wonderful memoir and essays called Place Envy. And I knew him from my Lesley University MFA program. And I said, hey, I have this cool idea. Maybe you could help me figure out what to do with all of this stuff. And what is it? I don't know if it's a book, if just a bunch of snippets. That was the original plan. And over a couple of months over the summer of 2024, it became clear through Michael's eyes that there was a deeper story underneath, the family story. So, and my attachment to my family and my difficulty in letting go of that attachment in order to find life and love and freedom and a sense of my own separate identity, the push-pull in the subtitle, outside of my family, because there was a lot of confusion in my family about stay home, protect the core group, and the outside world is dangerous. It's a lot of confusion. So Michael kind of saw that, and he said, let's see if we can go deeper. And I was like, no, I've had 100 years of therapy. I don't want to dredge up all this stuff. So finding the order was much later in the process. Building the content took probably 5 to 8 months, just writing. And I started noticing the themes, and I started noticing I didn't have push-pull in mind. I didn't have any of that in mind, but it kind of rose out of the page.
So you were talking about going deeper and a little bit about the genesis of the family pressure on you. And you have in number 7, I think, of your little micro memoirs, you have one that kind of describes that. Would you be willing to read that?
Sure. Thanks for asking. So this is, I'll show you, it's a little show and tell because every micro memoir has an illustration as well by Anna Hall, and maybe we'll be able to talk about that. So this is one of 7 psychology interludes that also evolved out of this process of trying to put together a through line for my life story. And because I am trained as a therapist and practice as a therapist part-time, the theories behind all of this just were calling out to me all the time. I ended up being a theme throughout the book where I have about 7 psychology interludes about different theories and how they mesh with my life and my development. So this is the first one. So the title is, And Now for a Psychology Interlude, Salvador Minuchin's Theory of Enmeshment. Think blurred boundaries, a sloshing blob of cells within a rigid, impermeable perimeter. What's mine is yours. Space, bodies, thoughts, achievements. Minuchin's emotionally incestuous family system. Thick in the ether of my childhood, inhaled from Jewish grandparents who fled Tsarist Russia seeking safety, an implicit mandate. We have everything you need. You're surrounded with love. Stay close, stay loyal, and we survive. If you leave, one of us might die.
Yeah. And so that really shows the enmeshment that you have with both of your parents and your family members. And you get into deeper areas of that as well. The boundary pushing, the dichotomy of what you were supposed to feel about your sexuality, about sex, about partnership. So much of that is ensconced in these little mini memoirs, which are, what are they, 70 words each?
Yes.
It's almost like a haiku effect, but a long one, right?
Right, exactly. It was sort of the challenge and the opportunity of it was, what form do these take anyway? Can I play with, does it have to be prose, or can it be prose poem? Some have sort of, as it turns out, staccato rhythm, like punchy rhythm with very short phrases, and some are more lyrical, and some have line breaks and paragraph breaks, and some don't. This was not a conscious thing where I decided to do that. Each one told me what it needed to be in some ways.
Yeah. And so you cover so much of your life. You cover your whole life. And there's also some techniques that you use throughout. And I wanted to talk to you about them. And I know we have 70 of these, so I'm just bringing up around two, three, four. But there's one of them that talks about the issue of parenthood and having children and not having children. And you have two of these that address that. Could you read those two?
Sure. I'm in college at the University of Michigan. Here's the piece with the illustration, which will make sense maybe once I read it. And I'm just turned 21. I had a one-night stand with a really hot waiter at the restaurant where I was a waitress. And the one before this describes how in the throes of the heat of the moment, I made a decision not to go to the bathroom and put my diaphragm in, because that's what women did. For women were in charge of birth control in those days. The men just did whatever they wanted to do. So I got pregnant, the one shot out of the box. And I was just 21. So it's called denouement, after the climax one. Are you sure? The Planned Parenthood counselor asks. Yes. I'm only 21, plenty of time for kids. Over the whirring of the vacuum suction, the nurse squeezes my hand. I vomit from the Demerol. Afterward, no tears, no regrets. Just relief among the circle of women I join, relaxing in orange recliners, sipping juice. Steve drives me home and plays me Ravel and Fauré and Debussy until I fall asleep. Steve is not the man who got me pregnant, but I had a relationship with him, and actually we're still friends to this day. But I never saw that other guy again.
And then you go out with someone who wants someone who will bear children, but we'll skip that one, and then we'll go to 55.
55 is called 60th Birthday Reverie. I imagine leaning over and whispering to my 21-year-old self, the one at Planned Parenthood. So, Deb, guess what? Turns out this will be your one and only pregnancy. No true love, no husband, no kids. Do you want to change your mind? For the first time, I wonder, was it a boy or a girl? What would my child have been like? Would I have been a good mother?
So that's so vulnerable. And you putting it on the paper is just so, you're calling back to that time when you thought there were so many possibilities. And as we get older, the realities change of what is actually possible. Some of it from body, some of it from economics, from all different standpoints. But I think there's a lot of bravery in this book, the way that you address people and things that happen to you. And was that hard for you to do? I mean, you are a therapist, so these subject matters are probably something you deal with a lot of times with people who come to you. But when it's yourself, I go have a therapist and for many years, and I think it's definitely harder for a therapist to reveal these kinds of things.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I don't really inhabit my therapist persona as a writer. It would interfere too much with writing about my own life, about my own struggles. So I long ago let that stand in some ways. I have a very small private practice now, but I do have a public persona as a writer with all these personal essays. So I had to decide, what do I want to reveal about myself? And my identity as a writer is so strong that it felt much more important to me to tell the truth of my life. I don't want to censor myself anymore. I want to tell what's true. And I run writing groups called Write It Like It Is, where it's basically kind of the old Natalie Goldberg model of I give prompts, they write, they share, no critique, no craft analysis, no workshopping. I've done this since 2009. It's extraordinary under those circumstances when there's no aspiration to publish what people, especially over time when they get to know the other group members, feel safe to reveal that are so, I mean, there's not a lot that's completely personal to us. There's so much more. As you know, I've watched so many of your podcasts, and people talk about the universality of our stories and why that's the most important thing, is that people can identify. That's like me. I had 10 excerpts that were published on Oldster magazine just exactly a year ago. I think it was May 30th of last year with Sari Botton. I won't go into the story of how I connected with her. I didn't know her, but she said, submit some, maybe I'll put some up. She put up 10 excerpts, and it got something like 59,000 views within a week and hundreds of comments. People, women mostly, but not all women, saw themselves. It was skewed toward the aging part. So 60 plus, the 60th birthday reverie was in that set. That was incredibly validating. It's like, oh, I knew that I'm not the only one, but to have this conversation and this validation was very, very moving.
And so what was your challenge, your biggest challenge writing these or doing this book?
There are two big challenges. One was the content, deciding on the content, choosing from a million options, and figuring out what the story was, figuring out what was the story that I wanted to tell, too, because there's many stories I could have told. So this one about the push-pull, about the gravitational pull of my family that kept me there, wanting something, wanting the connection, but also kept me inhibited and restrained from doing the things like that micro that I read describes about don't leave or somebody dies. So that's an unconscious message that I think a lot of people who grow up in enmeshed families feel. So that was very challenging to decide. I couldn't have done it if my parents were alive, let's just say that. I mean, there's things that show them in a negative light, but also I tried to find balance, showing the loving and caring parts of our relationship, which added to the tension, that push-pull. So then the other challenge was this crazy idea I had of having everyone be 70, exactly 70 words each. So that was a challenge. And both happened at the same time in some ways. I was creating scenes, thinking of scenes, and then sometimes I'd spend hours and hours or weeks on one that, later hit the cutting room floor.
What have you done with them? Are you going to do something with the ones that hit the cutting room floor?
Oh, thanks for asking. Yeah, I mean, some of them I've posted on my Substack, which is called Write It Like It Is. And I have a few resurrected micro memoirs from the cutting room floor. I think I had 2 or 3, like part 1, part 2, or part 3 or something, because people were asking. So I found ones that I liked enough. And in fact, it's funny, Estelle, because one of them that I posted as not in the book, 6 months later, that was the one called Wishes Interrupt Us.
Oh, yeah.
I felt like it belonged there after all. So I had to get rid of one of my darlings and replace it because it fit the storyline much better than the one, I don't remember what it was. So there was a lot of shuffling around at the very, very end, even, just especially when the artwork became a part of it. It's like, oh, that's a different level.
You self-published this, is that correct? So tell me about that decision. Like, was it you always knew you wanted to do it, or did you try the traditional route and it didn't work? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, so in January 2020, I had my 70. I landed on 70. I was calling it at that time, This is 70, A Life in Micro Memoirs, something like that. And yeah, I mean, I used the whole network to reach out to people who publish with small presses, indie presses, artsy presses. And I did a lot of research to see who was accepting unagented manuscripts and who might be interested in this particular piece, which is kind of odd. I mean, 4,900 words, 70 by 70 is not a book in some realms, but I always envisioned it as a book in the way that it came out, but not with the illustrations. So yeah, I spent months querying, reaching out through Submittable, through other web pages where they were open for submissions. And mostly I didn't hear back of, and then for months, maybe months later, all rejections, but some I never even did hear back from. And people said, well, what about submitting it to a literary magazine? What about just a long essay? Or what about looking into the poetry world, and maybe it could be a chapbook, just one of those slim volumes of poetry. And I didn't want that. I wanted it to be a book. I always had a vision of that. So when the Ulster magazine pieces went up and I realized that there's something here, a few weeks later, I had a piece that's called Bosom Buddies that takes place in the beginning. And that was accepted by Hattie Fletcher, who's the editor and the team at Short Reads.
Yeah, she's been on a panel of mine for AWP a couple of years ago.
Yes, I've never met her, but I've heard wonderful things. And they were great. So they accepted Bosom Buddies as a one-off, put it on Short Reads. And as you may know, Anna Hall is on that team, and she does all these digital illustrations for each Wednesday post. I loved her illustrations so much. I reached out to her and just sent an email. I said, wow, you really got the emotional core of this piece. Like, some other people thought it was funny and cute, but there's a dark side to it. There's a twist, a turn at the end, which is often a feature of micro-memoir, as I learned because I studied the form after I started writing. And I started emailing with Anna, and I said, oh, wouldn't it be amazing if I could have a book with illustrations for all 70, kind of I'd like to say. And then with more rejections, but also the urgency of not wanting to wait 2 or 3 years to see a book, by the time somebody accepted, it'd be 2026, here we are, and then maybe I'd see it 2027, 28. So I just, with Anna, we decided, well, let's try, let's figure this out, let's do it. I wanted to set a goal of self-publishing it then, because she helps self-publishing authors. She designs and does all the technical stuff on Amazon or Ingram Spark. So I learned about how that works. I let go of my shame about that, as if it's, oh, I'm such a loser, I have to self-publish. And I wrote a piece actually for Brevity Blog about that. The whole process of self-publishing and letting go of the stigma that's attached to that, to say, I have something special and I want to share it. And if no one wants to publish it, I'm going to take creative control here. So I worked with Anna on Zoom weekly for some months. And I set a goal of having it launch on my 72nd birthday this year, February 27th. So the whole thing about 70 and February 27th is kind of a theme. And here we worked really hard to meet that deadline. And I'm just thrilled with the product. It's Ingram Spark.
It looks beautiful. So working with her, you said you worked weekly. Did you give her the list, or did she read each micro memoir, or how did that work? Did you come up with ideas together, or did you say to her, let me know what you think for each of that? I'm just curious of that process.
No, it was such a fun process. And we kind of found our process together over time, because the content, the story needed, what I wanted was not just an echo of the piece, of the words. I wanted the illustrations to add a level of meaning, to add a level even to the story, to even tell a little story in and of itself. She's created a couple of samples for me, and we talked about them. And I said, what about this? What about that? And she said, and she just got it. We just were in sync, in the same way that I was with Michael, my developmental editor. So we met, and what we would do is think through each piece, not one at a time and not in order. We're just kind of picking what might be one that we could resolve easily. So many of them were her ideas. We would look at what illustrators call reference images. An example of a reference image, where the one that I mentioned called Wishes Interruptus, I have a relationship with a guy who from out of town who flew in, and he would rent a Rolls Royce and park his Rolls Royce rental in my kind of crappy apartment complex parking lot. It was so funny. So out of all the things that were possible to illustrate, that was the one that popped out to me. Like, what if we just had a Rolls Royce And Anna, we had these ideas throughout of where to place the artwork. So this one is driving off the page into the gutter. And so we looked up images of Rolls Royces and went through a bunch of images. They're all over online. And what she would do is we would find an image that we agreed on, and then she would do these gorgeous pencil drawings. And some of them would be very much a replication of the image if the rights were available, or her own interpretation of the idea that we had.
There's so many stories throughout, and that brings us through. It transports us. And then you end with Now What? I was wondering if you could read that.
Well, that's number 67 out of the 70. And it comes right after a scene. This is how I worked really hard to hinge together the narrative so that one could lead to the next in a sequential way, which is very different from snippets thrown together or chosen from previously published work. No one's actually ever done what I've done, is to have a linked set of micro memoirs of exactly the same word count. So it follows after my mother's death and the aftermath of my mother's death. It's called Now What? And there's a butterfly theme in the art throughout as well. So there's recurring themes with the art as well, which is fun to find. Kind of like a picture book. Model butterflies travel from Canada to Mexico without a map. Instinct, compulsion, spiders trap, raindrops drown, millions die. Survivors cluster for months before returning. How would it be to set out on a preordained path, persist without deliberation, obey one's destiny despite dangers? Sometimes I'm overwhelmed by possibilities. Sometimes I'd like to soar like a butterfly on a thermal wind. No thought, no feeling, just moving toward whatever lies ahead.
Yeah, it's so lovely. It's so evocative. And it does follow that thread of your mother passing away and then this feeling that you're having. So there are just so many themes, the psychological interludes throughout, the butterfly images throughout, the movement, the dance. What do you want to have the main message to everyone?
I mean, I think some of the blurbs that I got for the book were shocking and wonderful to me because the main message came across that here's a woman, a girl who grows up in this tight-knit family where you're not allowed to leave or someone will die is the sort of inherited legacy. And yet I had this spirit and this drive to get out of the family enough to have a separate life, to fall in love, hopefully myself, and have a healthy, intimate relationship, and to be free of the gravitational pull, as I might have said earlier, but also remain connected. Not an estrangement. It wasn't anything I ever sought. So I think the message is that it's possible. It's possible to find yourself as a separate person, to love yourself, to embody yourself fully as a separate person, even when there's been such crushing intrusion and expectations that were, I think, through no fault of my parents, but this inherited kind of legacy of stay home, stay safe.
It's like generational trauma.
Yeah, it is actually. But I think I was very lucky, Estelle, because my parents lived long enough. My mom died at 99. My father died at 93. And I, by then, was in my 60s and able to have a healthy, separate relationship with them. So that was earned. And it also was extremely meaningful to have an opportunity to have that resolution, which not everybody has.
One of the stories talks about they gave you a hug and this time you didn't need to pull away, like it was okay because it was you were in a good place with you.
Exactly. Thanks for noticing that. I have to say I'm a long time viewer of your work, of your podcast. So first of all, it's a little surreal being in the frame where I've watched so many other people be interviewed. And then to know that you took my little book and put so much time and thought into it. And it's really a gift. I love watching your interviews with other people because they're so layered and thoughtful, but complex, not just superficial, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you so much. And it's been so wonderful to talk to you. I appreciate so much about all the nuance of what you've done from the craft perspective and not just the story perspective. And you really, in 70 words with 70 micro memoirs, put so much of your life, your emotion, your story, your journey, your family, the psychological, I mean, just so much is involved in this that even from the generational trauma, and you mentioned in there a book that I found many, many decades ago that I loved, The Drama of the Gifted Child. That really resonated for me as well in your book. There's just so much to it, and I recommend everyone get it because you just need to make sure that you're seeing what aging and wisdom can do for someone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Follow me at estelleserasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.